Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this TD webinar about the complete grid story. We are actually going to show you all the things that have been coming in the Team Developer Grid since its introduction in Team Developer 5.1. There's been a host of things like new column types, grouping and sorting features, a summary bar, and upcoming things in 6.2 like saving a grid state. I'm your host, Martin Tietz, and I will guide you through the webinar. If you have questions during the webinar, I'd like to ask you to put the questions into the Q&A tool or into the chat tool so we can answer them at the end of the webinar. Your speaker today is Anna Paula Bonani. She's our technical support manager and a long-year expert of Team Developer. And I'd like Anna to go ahead now. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me, Martin?
Yes.
Good. I hope everybody can hear me as well. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. As Martin said, my name is Anna Paula, and I'll be talking to you today about this webinar, The Complete Grid Story. And it will mainly be a review of all the features that we put in the grid since we started in Team Developer 5.1. This presentation, by the way, is the same presentation that we did at DevCon, at the developer conferences last year, so hopefully you haven't seen it yet, but if you did, I hope you still enjoy it. The agenda today is quite big, and I'll be going through the features quite quickly. I'll have some demos during the presentation, but like I said, the point of this presentation is to serve as a reference for people that are looking into going to the grid right now, that people are using different versions of Team Developer. So this is your reference to know and understand which features came in first and which features got introduced later in the product. So we'll talk a little bit about the grid concept and the benefits using the grid, the functionality of Team Developer 5.1, the first grid when it was introduced, what it had embedded in it. Then we'll talk about the features by version, TD 5.2, 6.0, 6.1, and 6.2, which is our next major release coming up this year. And I'll be using 6.2 for my demos and samples in this presentation. So quickly, what is the grid? The grid is the new table window object. Has the table window been replaced by the grid? No, the table window still exists and will continue to exist in our product and still a supported object. So the grid is a new table window, as in it offers new features, it has new functionalities and new capability since Team Developer 5.1. It's a modern tool, it's themed, it has a better look and feel than the table window with colors and different cell types, which we are going to explain in details. And it also includes built-in features to get out of the box grouping, sorting, and print preview functionality. There are some benefits of using the grid as opposed to the table windows. It has greater usability because it has new cell types, for instance, push buttons and date pickers, which are widely used by end users for all sorts of applications. It's easy to use. It has a quite easy interface for the end users. It allows developers to create grouped reports with little or no code. This feature can be achieved via the print preview. When you print preview your grid, and we'll see that in a couple of slides, you can use that report because it automatically will show the data grouped and sorted by the columns that you chose during the application usage. And no change required from original table windows. And I say that carefully because, like I said before, the grid is a new object. It doesn't replace the table window. The table window still exists, but we made all efforts to have the same functionality that you had in your applications before the grid to continue to use. So you should be able to migrate your application code without any changes, which doesn't mean that the grid behaves in all instances the same way as the table window. Like I said, they're different objects, but our goal is to support all the functionality that existed in the table window as much as we can in the new grid. So the first grid, introduced in Team Developer 5.1, it allowed a quick move from the table windows to out of the box, a more modern control with different colors, different cell types. So basically, we introduced a new object that you could use if you wanted to have a better object display to your end user in your application started in Team Developer 5.1. The first grid in 5.1 was only available as a child table. It supported a subset of child table functions. Through the versions, we introduced many more table windows functions in the grid. So the support nowadays, if you go to 6.1, you will notice that we support many more table windows functions as compared to the first release. And it provided new features including 8 new different cell types, several new grid APIs, and built-in context menu providing more extended functionality. We're going to talk about these 3 categories in a few slides. So in Team Developer 5.1, all you had to do, you went into your child table from a table window perspective, into Attribute Inspector, and simply change that child table by a child grid. As you can see on that slide, all the properties in the Attribute Inspector were the same. So without much effort, you had table window converted into a child grid without no code changes, but at the same time, you got all the new functionality for free into that new object. We tried, since Team Developer 5.1, fully support existing code. So what have we done in 5.1 to achieve that? Same active coding assistant properties as the table windows, the same cache management system as the table windows into the grid, support for the flags that your application used with the table windows, like the table, row, and column flags, compatibility with SalTable APIs, compatibility with some messages, and with Visual Tool Chest table functions. Like I said, our goal since the beginning was to provide full support, and we improved on that along the versions that we delivered after Team Developer 5.1, which was our first grid. Talking a little bit about the new grid cell types introduced in Team Developer 5.1, those cell types, they can be defined at design time, or they can be set programmatically via code. Each cell type has its own set of properties. So for each of the new types that we introduced, you can at the same time set properties for them during design time or runtime. The new types were the radio button, checkbox, progress bar, password field, duration, datetime, hyperlink, and the push button cell type. Let's have a look at each of them individually. The first one, the datetime cell, is a datetime with a date picker included in it. Offered full compatibility with the old datetime cell type, and the runtime properties offered, many of them, as you're going to see for each of those cell types, many runtime properties were offered for most of them, and including 24-hour format, show date, time, date only, or show only the time for that control. So as you can see here on the screen, that's a date time, date picker, cell type introduced in Team Developer 5.1 grid. The progress cell, it's a progress bar. It has a specific begin and end color, which again can be set via its runtime properties. And there are many more. For instance, you can set your progress bar to vertical position, horizontal position. You can define colors for begin and end, the increment step, etc. We're going to see a sample about this, which is also available when you install Team Developer into the samples folder. You can find a complete grid example there where you can play with all those properties. But we're going to have a quick look into a demo soon. Another cell type introduced was the button cell, which is a push button style type of cell. So like this, for instance, if you look at the title here, it looks like a push button with full functionality, so you can click on it and trigger an action from that push button. And again, runtime properties like behave like a checkbox, so true and false, set the alignment for the text, set the text wrap, etc. Another cell type which actually existed in the table window was the password cell. Replaces the text by a star as you type information into that field. So here, for instance, the username is a password field, so it doesn't display the characters. It doesn't have any runtime properties. The duration cell, which is a duration format in the format of days, hour, minutes, and seconds. It also has some runtime properties. Here it is, the duration field here. You can choose to put a scroll on it or not, up, down buttons. You can set, show the duration in days, hours, minutes, seconds, etc. HyperLink Cell, which is that one that you can see on the right here. Actually, we should change it to guptatechnology.com. Basically, a link to a URL which will be invoked by the default browser when you click on it. It has some runtime properties like text, color for the visited link, underline when hovering, visited state, etc. So, for instance, you could change the color after the user clicks on that link on your grid. The radio button cell, which is another cell type introduced with the grid. It's a radio button, like you can see here, with a title on a cell. A design time property of checked and unchecked, and no runtime properties for this cell type. Same thing for the checkbox title cell. It's a checkbox, as you can see here, with a title on a cell. It can be checked and unchecked during design time, and it has no runtime properties linked to it. So those are the 8 new cell types introduced. So how do I play with these properties? How do I get information about my cell type and set the properties for each specific cell type? Well, we've introduced in Team Developer 5.1 some grid APIs. All the grid APIs begin with SalGrid. You'll see during this presentation that there are some SalTable APIs that can also be used with the grid, so bringing both together. But whenever you see a SalGrid API, it can only be used with the grid. It's not backwards compatible with the table windows. So 3 sets of new functions mainly. SalGrid set cell type and SalGrid get cell type to set and get the type of cell during runtime. So during runtime, I want to change my column from a standard column to a push button. I can use set cell type to do that. SalGrid set cell prop and SalGrid get cell prop I'm going to use this set of functions to set or get the cell type specific property. So if I get a cell type of date time picker, for instance, and I want to change the format of the date, I can use that set of functions to do that, to change specific properties for that specific cell type. And the last one, SalGrid print and SalGrid print preview. It's a set of functions to print or preview the grid by simply passing its object name, and the result will be this screen that will be open to your end user without you having to code anything. It will have a set of functionality like zoom, a print button, the page mode, how many pages you want to see in your print preview, and this, like I said, for free. You don't have to program anything to make that happen. Print preview with group and sorting. That's a very useful tool for print and preview, because if during your application execution you changed your grid, you sorted it by name, for instance, if you grouped it by country, state, etc., when you do a print preview calling the SalGrid print preview function, this will be automatically shown to your end user as well. So the state that the grid had before you call the print preview function will show after you call that function as well. So it can be used as an easy way to create a quick report from your grid. Talking a little bit about the built-in context menu for the grid, that's also a feature that is embedded in the grid. You don't have to program anything to make that happen. It has a context menu. When you right-click on top of any column of the grid, you're going to get a menu with this set of properties here. Group by and group by box, those options will allow you to select individual or multiple columns to group by. You get also menu options for sorting ascending and descending. You get all columns available to you. You can mark them, check or unchecked to display or hide these columns in your grid. Align the grid contents. You can use alignment for that, and best fit to resize the columns to fit to the display. So all that comes for free. You get it when you right-click on top of the columns. I wanted to focus a little bit in the group by box, because that's the functionality that will allow you to group your grid by more than one column. So first thing that you have to do is to enable the group by box, which will create this area here on top of your grid, and then you can simply drag and drop columns back and forth from the grid to that group by box, or back into the grid to group and ungroup by multiple columns. Now let's say that your end user doesn't like the context menu, or you as a developer don't want to give your user, or you can't give your user all that functionality. We give you the option to disable the context menu. So when the user right-clicks on the grid, you won't see that menu anymore. All you have to do is to return false into the on-sum context menu message for the grid, and that context menu will be disabled. Nonetheless, you can still call the solve functions programmatically for grouping and sorting your grid, even though your context menu is not enabled. So you still have the functionality, but you'll not be using the grid built-in context menu for that. Okay, so let's have a quick look at the grid functionality. I'm going to open an application here. And like I said, this application is a sample available with TD. So if you download the samples from the website, install the samples into your team developer directory, you're going to get this application called Sample Grid and you can go ahead, like I'm doing here, and just play with the features for the grid. So here, for instance, I'm using Team Developer 6.2. I'm connecting to SQL Base 11.7, my island database. Everybody knows it. And I can start playing with it. For instance, here I have the push button columns, which shows all the grid columns available to me in that grid. And I can select different column types for each individual column. For instance, here I want to turn my column type, company name, into a push button. And so I use the SalGrid function for that to set the cell type. And I can use the cell props functionality to change the properties of the column type button. For instance, I can change the text to align to center, apply, and I can see here in my grid that all my columns turned into a cell button type. And of course, you can do that for any of the columns in your grid. So again, you can just play with that sample to get to that. So let me go back to a standard cell type here so I can carry on with the demo. For the grouping functionality, like I said, you can do everything that you do using the context menu. You can do via program as well, using the SalGrid functions for that. So for instance, here I want to group my grid by country. I'll apply the changes, and it's going to show the grid grouped by country for me. And like I said before, if I do a print preview, let me zoom here a little bit, my print preview will be automatically grouped by country as well. Let me close it here. Showing the context menu a little bit. So what I did here was to right-click on top of any column of my grid, and for instance, if I enable my group by box, it creates this area here. It was grouped by country, so the country cell was already there, the column was already there. I can put it back into my grid anywhere I want. I can move it, or I can group by more than one just by dragging and dropping these columns into my group by box. Okay, so that's a quick demo of what was offered into the Team Developer 5.1 grid. So let me close this application here, go back to the presentation. Great, so now we released Team Developer 5.2. That was a while ago, actually. And what have we introduced in there? Well, first, if you remember, the table window in 5.1 was only a child table object. Now, in Team Developer 5.2, the grid is also available as a top-level window object. So when you create a new window into TD in your outline, the green window shows up as a top-level window like any other dialog box, form, etc. We also provided a table to grid conversion tool. So it was a wizard basically to convert all your table windows into grid from your outline. And we extended existing support for Sol Table APIs. So the same Sol Table APIs that you used with the table windows, we implemented more Sol Table APIs to be allowed into the grid as well. So let's talk a little bit about each of these categories. So the table to grid conversion tool was available for easy conversion either via graphical tool, an interface, or command line for big applications. Some customers have really huge applications using table windows, so doing it via command line made it much faster for them. It's a very simple tool. It takes an application file as input, an app, apt, or APL. Then it allows you to select from a list of existing table windows to be converted automatically. So here on the left side, I have my first screen of the table to grid conversion tool. I select an output directory. I select my APLs here in this case. It will show all APLs available to me within that source. And I'll open that selected file, and it's going to show me the top-level table classes, top-level tables, child table classes, and child tables, and I can select all that I want to convert. Then I just save outline as text, and it's going to give me a new outline with all table windows in those classes converted into grids. To use the command line, the name of the tool is table, number 2, grid. The first parameter is a string, which will specify the application outline, app, apt, or APL, which has the table window. And the second parameter will be a string, which specifies the output directory to store the converted file from table to grid. Okay. Cell language for grouping and sorting. This was a new functionality in Team Developer 5.2. We allowed the same function, sort table, sort rows, to be used to programmatically sort the grid by a specific column. So the same function used for the table could then be used for the grid as well. Also, another sort table window function, sort table set column flags. If you use it with the call is group by flag enabled, then you'll be able to group your grid by multiple columns. And when the flag is turned off, the column is placed at the far right of the grid. This is the default behavior. So to reposition it, you can simply call sort table set column pause to reposition the column into the right place where you wanted it to be. So those functions to programmatically group and sort the grid. So a summary of the SalGrid API so far. So I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 SalGrid functions introduced in Team Developer 5.1, and in Team Developer 5.2, 2 new functions were introduced. SalGrid set cell picture to set a picture to a cell. Actually, in that sample that I showed before, you can do that as well. So the example can be seen in there. And SalGrid sort rows multi-column to sort the grid by more than one column at one time. So those 2 new functions came into Team Developer 5.2. Okay, so now we release Team Developer 6.0. What's new in Team Developer 6.0 for the grid? Well, more Sol functionality. So 3 different areas. Export the contents of the grid into a file, which could be an Excel file, text file, a CSV, or an XML file. The ability to set and get the footer and header information for that grid, and the ability to dynamically create new columns using a column class as template. In 6.0, we also introduced the TD.NET WPF grid. So TD6.0 was the first version where we have now the ability to generate TD.NET WPF executables, and of course the grid is one of the objects that are supported into that new build target. And we'll see how it works in a couple of slides. Okay, so to export the grid contents, it's a simple call to a function SalGrid data export and that function will export the contents of the grid to the specified file type and name. So the first parameter will be the handle of the grid, as usual. The second parameter is the name of the file that you'll be writing to, and the last parameter is the format to create. We've offered 4 different formats: text, XML, Excel, and CSV. So a simple example: call SalGrid data export, name of the grid, name of the file, and format. If the file already exists, it simply be overwritten by that function call. The other possibility for the grid, and that was a request from customers actually, was to set the grid header. So to set the header, that will appear whenever you call SalGrid print or SalGrid print preview. You have the ability to have a header and a footer for that preview. So the function is SalGrid set header, a couple of parameters there. The first is the handle of the grid, followed by the font to use in the, the text for the header, the font to be used for the text, the size of the font, if you want it in bold, italic, and underline. So you set those parameters to true or false, depending on if you want bold, italic, or underline. So a simple example, SalGrid set header. So again, the handle of the grid, the text that you want to appear as header. One note here is that that string for the header or footer can contain specifiers. So for instance, in this case, I'm using specifiers for page, date, for the current date and time, and all the other parameters for the font, size, etc. So it's quite flexible in that sense. So that was for setting the grid header. I can also get the header that was specified. So get the current header text, which appears at the top of the pages when the grid is printed. It only takes 2 parameters, the handle of the grid and the string which will receive the header text. So in my example here, SalGrid set header, the handle of the grid, data grid header is the text. When I call SalGrid get header, this text data grid header will show into my header text variable, receive variable here. So the same thing for the footer, the ability to set the footer that will appear when calling SalGrid print or print preview. Exactly the same parameters. And once again, when I call SalGrid set footer, I can also use the specifiers. For instance, here I'm using specifiers for page, date, and time for my footer in the grid. And to retrieve, again, SalGrid get footer with 2 parameters, the handle of the grid and the receive for the footer text. So basically, as normally when we release new functions in TD, we always have a set of set and get functions, and that is no different for the header and the footer of the grid. And the other main functionality that I wanted to expand a little bit on was the ability to create columns based on a class template. So basically, you create a class template, and from that class template, you create programmatically a new column into a grid. Now, in 6.1, when we introduced this, are we talking about 6.1 here or 6.0? Sorry, I get a bit lost. Yes, 6.0, sorry. So in 6.0, when we introduced that function, we also put it in the table window. So you can use that same sol table create column from class function for both the grid and the table window. So the first parameter is the grid or table window into which the new column will be inserted. The class name is the second parameter, so it's the name of the column class to be used as a template and the position where you want this new column to be inserted in the grid or table window. So as an example, Sol table create column from class, the handle of the grid. The second parameter is the name of the class, the column class, and the position 1 if you want to insert it in the leftmost position, and -1 indicates that you want to append the column at the end of the table. So pretty straightforward. So the other functionality for the grid in Team Developer 6.0 was the ability to create WPF applications, desktop or browser, using grid as well. Now, I want to clarify something. If you are using Team Developer Win32 and you want to go to teamdeveloper.net, you do not need to convert from table window to grid. I think there's been a bit of confusion in the past regarding that. Internally, we have two different objects, one for Windows 32 and one for td.net. That's why they look different. But if you're going to td.net, you do not need to convert from table windows from grid. That happens in the code without you having to do anything. So please, if you have in mind that in the future you want to go to .net, don't worry about the grid or table window. That's not a problem at all. We will do it automatically for you. We have two different objects for each of the environments, and everything will work as it should without the need for any manual conversion. Okay, so the grid in WPF, it has a very similar user interface as the one that you see in Win32, but it has some usability features in addition to the ones found in Win32. And one of those features is the ability to enable data filtering. I'm going to do a quick demo about that to clarify what it is. And I have here ability to color every other row in the grid. This didn't exist in Win32 in 6.0, but in 6.1 this feature is also available for Win32. So let's see a little bit more about them. So I'll show the enable filtering in a demo, and let's talk a little bit about changing the background colors. So in WPF Grid, in Team Developer 6.0, and for both Win32 and WPF in 6.1, I have a function called SalGrid set alt row back colors, and that function will allow me to set the background color of every other row in the grid. It will look like this. Basically, you can have different colors for every other row. So let's back up a little bit. So SalGrid set alt row back colors. The first parameter is the handle of the grid, and then you can have two colors specified, one to indicate the color of the first row, and then third, fifth, seventh, etc. And then in color 2 to indicate the color of the second row, and fourth, sixth, etc. So even and odds, basically. So for example, SalGrid set alt row back colors, handle of the grid, and two constants for color 1 and color 2. If you want to reset the background color of the rows, you can simply pass color default into the constant for the colors. So let's have a look. Open Team Developer 6.2, and let's have a quick view of the grid in WPF. So first, let me make sure I'm in WPF mode here. I'm not, so I'm going to enable a .NET application, .NET WPF desktop, target type, OK. No, I do not want to run the upgrade report at this moment. I'll just run my application, and we'll compile and hopefully show it to me running in WPF desktop in a couple of seconds. Okay, so here's my grid in WPF. Like I said, it looks pretty much like the same grid as we had in Win32. If I right-click, I'll see the same context menu. I still can do my group by box. I can still drag and drop the columns. Like I said, it has a slightly different behavior here. For instance, you can see that the rows were automatically are not automatically expanded. So it is a different object, like I said before. Okay, so the data filtering feature that I mentioned before. So I'm going to filter enable here, my grid. You notice that it creates a little icon here, which is very much the default behavior for WPF applications. And let's say, for instance, that I want to filter this grid by a certain country. So I can come here and select USA, and it will automatically show me just the USA companies, show me just the companies in the USA for that grid. And I can do other stuff, like, for instance, I just want companies in the USA where the city is equal to San Francisco or Chicago. Hopefully that was one of the cities there. Yeah, Chicago. So basically, I can let my user filter data as it goes using that functionality for the WPF grid. And I can do that, obviously, for any column. It's also, I can do case sensitive here as well. Okay, so the other functionality that I wanted to show was the setting different colors for the rows. Again, it's pretty straightforward. I'm just going to call the SalGrid set alt back color rows. Yeah, the name of the handle of my grid company, and I'm going to copy and paste from here because I'm a bit lazy. I'm going to copy the colors from here into my outline. Yeah, and compile again. And hopefully we'll show my compiled application with different colors for every other row. So there you go. Like I said, this was introduced in 6.0, but in 6.1 you can also do this alternate colors for the Win32 application as well. Actually, let's make sure. Sorry. If I go back here to a Win32 application, that should work. Yeah, so that works because I'm using 6.2. So you can use that in Win32 as well, not only WPF. Okay, back to the presentation because we still have a couple of things to cover. Now, talking about Team Developer 6.1. We released 6.1 and we again added more functionality to the grid based on customer requests, etc. First one, importing grid contents, and second one, a new summary bar. So the new summary bar is the feature that enables a new row to appear at the bottom of the grid. The reason why we did that was because customers were looking to have the same functionality of the old splitter table that they could use with the table window, now with the grid. So if you enable this feature, the summary bar for the grid in Team Developer 6.1 and on, you will automatically show updated statistics for each column that you enable. For instance, total, maximum, minimum, average, and I'm missing count here as well for the summary bar. So let's have a look at the first feature, the ability to import grid content. So in 6.0, you could export. Now to complete that set of functionality, SalGrid data import to import data from XML, CSV, text, or Excel files into your grid. So again, very straightforward. The first parameter is the handle of the grid. The second parameter is the name of the file that you want to import and what is the format of that file. So in the example here, SalGrid data import, test1.csv, the format is CSV to bring the contents of that file into your grid automatically. And the grid summary bar, which is the other main function of TD 6.1 grid. It's an alternative for the table split window functionality. And notice I say alternative, not replacement. So it's another way, it's a new way that we found to give you basically the same functionality as the table split, but it's not the table split. That was something that only TD had. And we had to find an alternative which would work both for Win32 and WPF. So that's what it is. The common use case that we use the summary bar for is to show total, average, mean, max, and count values for your columns. For that, we introduced two new properties for the grid, which is the summary bar enabled yes or no, and hide column headers yes or no. And a new column property called column aggregate type, which is the one that defines minimum, maximum, average, total, and count values. So basically, if you go into the attribute inspector for the grid, you're going to see a summary bar enabled yes option in there, yes or no. And if you go into the column for the grid that has the summary bar enabled, you will see a column aggregate type of 5 different types. 6. Count is not showing here, but it's also available if you scroll down. Okay, so a simple example to demonstrate how it works. So as you can see here, just by looking at this screen layout, you can see that it simulates the old table split window. So how do we do this? In fact, we have two grids. This is grid 1 and this is grid 2. And if you look at the details, the properties of grid 2, you will see that it has a summary bar enabled yes and hide column headers yes. So let me go back there into the layout mode to show it to you. So basically it's a normal grid. If I say hide columns no, you can see that it has columns to it. I'll say yes, so we'll give you the impression that it's a single grid with two splitter windows there, but in fact they are two different grids. Okay, and into grid 2, which has a summary bar enabled, I have a column for which I define the column aggregate type, in this case total. It could be any other value here, including a user value that is user defined. So let's quickly run this application. Okay, so grid 1 showing the amounts, etc., and grid 2 showing me the totals for the column amount. So that can be done to simulate the splitter window functionality. Now, talking a little bit about the APIs for the summary bar, and I'm going to show another example soon. The summary bar, like I said, can be enabled or disabled. And for each column, you can set the average, maximum, minimum, sum, and count values separately using the SalGrid set summary column. And using the SalGrid set summary column label, you can set non-default label string for each of the summary columns. To obtain the column ID, which is one of the parameters that you use into the SalGrid set summary column and set summary column label functions, you can use Sol table query column ID to obtain the column ID to which you want to set those values for. So let's have a look at the quick demo of the summary bar APIs example. And all those samples, Martin can confirm at the end, but they should be available via the TD community, Team Developer community on the website. All the demos that we used during DevCons should also be available to you on their website. So here, basically, what I have is my form with several functions in it, several APIs. If I look at them, for instance, for enabling my summary bar, I just have to pass true or false into the SalGrid summary bar function. To remove it, I pass false. To set the column sum, SalGrid set summary column, and basically I just pass the constant for the average, for the summary function that I want to use, being sum, average, etc. Setting different labels. So it's very straightforward. Several grid APIs for each of the functionality, which can be easily seen if I run this example here. So here I'm showing summary bar, hiding the summary bar, so you can see that the bar at the bottom of the grid disappeared. Invoice date maximum, I'm showing the maximum value for this invoice field. Paid average, so instead of total, I'm showing the average here, showing the total, maximum, mean, count, etc. And I can also change my label to set to a user-defined one for both the title, the label, and the amount. Okay, we're almost done. I'm only missing to show what's new in Team Developer 5.2, sorry, 6.2. Like I said, 6.2 is planned to be available later this year. In the grid, again, we'll have a new functionality in it, which will be the ability to save and restore the grid state. So two new APIs, SalGrid write state, which will save the grid state into an XML file, and SalGrid apply state, which will restore the grid state based on the contents of this XML file. So, sorry, I have a demo here. Let's have a look on how it works in Team Developer 6.2. So again, very straightforward, two simple functions to save the grid state and to restore it. Now, it uses an XML file called gridstate.xml, which I probably have here in my folder. So I'm simply going to remove that grid state so you can see that it gets automatically created every time I call the function to write that file. Okay, so my grid is on a normal state here. Let's say, for instance, that I want to sort by company, and I also want to group by country. Okay, so I'm going to save the grid state. If you look into my folder, yeah, it created a grid state demo file. I can open it with Notepad, and you can see that it's a simple XML standard XML file. which simply states if my grid is grouped, if it has a summary bar, the row height, and other properties into this XML file. So when I retrieve this information, it can save it to me. Okay, so I'm going to close my application, start again, started in the normal state. If I restore the grid state, my company is sorted by name and it's grouped by country. So that will be the new function in Team Developer 6.2 for the grid, the ability to save and restore a grid state for your end user. Okay, and now I'll pass the control back to Martin so he can handle your questions that you may have at this point.
Thank you again, Anna, and thank you everybody for attending this webinar late in the day in Europe, maybe lunchtime in Americas. I hope you enjoyed it, and we are all looking forward to talk to you soon on our social networks or at the next webinar. Thank you for attending. Goodbye.